So I'm ready to introduce Mary. Mary Allen is the author of a literary memoir, The Rooms of Heaven, and a collection of personal essays, The Deep, Limitless Air, a memoir in pieces. She has an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and is the recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Creative Writing Fellowship. She's taught in the University of Iowa's nonfiction writing MFA program, as well as here in the festival. Mary Allen believes that, quote, the personal and the practical, the painful and the numinous, the spiritual and the ordinary are all blended together in our lives and cannot be separated. You can read Mary's regular Personal Perspectives blog on the Psychology Today website, whose topics reflect the intermingling of these themes, as reflected in post titles such as Lessons in Sadness, My Small Daily Vacation, Kindness Saved Me, When Bad Things Happen to Our Friends and Loved Ones, and my personal favorite, Do Cats Go to Heaven? I just love the vast range of human experience that Mary is willing to tackle, and I know she's going to pull a lot of that into her talk today. Mary is a full-time writing coach and lives here in Iowa City. She's giving a talk today on getting past perfectionism, which to me seemed like the perfect talk to kick us off. Applies to writers, applies to anyone, and I know in Mary's hands, her talk is going to have far-reaching implications, not only for our writing lives, but for our lives in general. So I'm so happy to welcome Mary Allen as our first speaker of the summer.
Well, I feel kind of choked up by that introduction, Becca. Thank you. I don't know why. I just want to say to everybody in the festival and everybody in the community, thank you for coming, and welcome to the Summer Writing Festival, our wonderful thing that we have every summer, although we did take a break during the time of the pandemic. Thank you, Becca, and thank you to Amy Margolis and everybody else organizing the festival for asking me to do this very first 11th hour talk today. Becca already said I'm going to be teaching a week-long class the week of July 14th, and then I'm going to be teaching a weekend class the weekend of July 27th and 28th. And in the weekend class, we're going to be working on some of what I'm going to be talking about today. So again, everybody can hear, right? So as you probably all know, the title of my talk today is Getting Past Perfectionism. I'm going to be talking about that as it relates to writing, of course, because this is a writing program and most of you who are here today are here to work on your writing. But I'm hoping that some of what I say today will also be useful in other areas of creative pursuit and even life. So I want to start off by talking about what I mean by the word perfectionism. And that is because as I have talked about it with a few people, it seems I run into people who don't exactly know what I'm talking about. And I think it's partly because the word perfectionism has the word perfect in it. So I just want to be clear, I'm not talking about being perfect or saying that we need to be more perfect. What I mean by perfectionism is something inside us that makes us feel like what we write has to be perfect right from the start. In other words, something makes it hard for us to put something imperfect down on the page and then work with it to make it better. And I'm kind of an expert in that. I've definitely had experiences with that myself. And as a writing coach, I work with people who struggle with that all the time. Perfectionism can also mean, a drive to get the writing as perfect, as good, and as perfect as we can. And that's a little different than what I'm talking about getting past today. I do think that a drive to make the writing as close to perfect as you can be very useful, if not essential, with writing. Well, writing is made up with many, many words, and each word counts. So, you have to pay attention to every word. It takes a profound level of attention to detail to write well. That's the way that perfectionism can actually be our friend, and we probably do need it. But the kind of perfectionism I'm talking about having to get past is more like an inner block. It happens when we all get all tangled up in the need to have the writing be perfect right away. And we feel like we're not good writers if we can't get it perfect right away. It can make it really hard to get anything down on the page. And it can also make it really hard to edit. And beyond writing, it can also make it hard to do a lot of other things too. So I just want to say, does everybody pretty much know what I'm talking about? And we'll have time for questions and sort of back and forth at the end. So I just want to say, I'm a writing coach. I work with many writers, and it's my experience that virtually everyone who is writing struggles to some extent with perfectionism. I think it's normal. I do think sometimes people feel a little ashamed that they struggle with perfectionism, but it's just normal. But it gets in the way, of writing, can make writing hard. Sometimes it can make writing hard to the point where you stop writing or you can hardly write at all. So I myself have a history of perfectionism getting in the way of writing. As Becca said in my introduction, I attended the Iowa Writers Workshop in the 1980s. That's how I ended up in Iowa City. And when I got out of the workshop, I tried to keep writing, and I wanted to write a novel, but I was on what I call the 3 sentences a day schedule. So in 2 hours, I could barely write 3 sentences. And it was predictable, it wasn't just one day, it was a bunch of days. And basically, I just got so bound up in second guessing what I was writing and second guessing the language and everything else that I couldn't even get one sentence down without stopping to edit it and then edit it again. And, it really made me crazy. And I think if I hadn't come up with ways to work with that, I probably would not have had any kind of body of work. But as it is, I have come up with some ways to work with it, and I have a huge body of work now, and growing. So, people talk a lot about writing being hard. You'll always find that, and it's my belief that perfectionism is actually, partly what makes it hard. That feeling that you have to get it perfect right off the bat, and if you don't, you're a bad writer, and that's a feeling that it makes it hard. And it happens both when you're generating new writing and then when you're editing the writing you've generated. And so I have suggestions for how to get past it in both areas, both generating writing and editing. And I just want to also say, for starters, it seems like these days everybody knows that perfectionism is not a good thing. People say things like the perfect gets in the way of the good, and we should all try to let go of our perfectionism, and I totally agree with that. But perfectionism is a thing that goes on in your head, and I have not had any luck at all changing my thinking patterns just because I know I should. I can't think my way out of thinking or make myself think something different. I just don't have any faith in my ability to change my thinking and somebody else's ability to change their thinking. I also have seen that sometimes people think, well, once I stop being, I have to get through my perfectionism and then I can write. And, you probably won't ever write anything if that's what you're waiting for, at least in my experience. And I also think that thinking that we need to change our thinking is just another way to tell ourselves we're not doing it right and setting ourselves up for failure. So it's like applying perfectionism to perfectionism. That just does not work. I've learned that over and over. But what I've also learned is that you can find ways around your perfectionism. You can sort of set it aside or outrun it or just work with it in that way. And that is what I've learned to do. And I do it one way when I'm generating new writing, and I do it another way when I'm editing the writing that I've generated. So I sort of outrun my perfectionism when I'm generating writing, and then I drop down below it into some other place inside myself when I'm editing. So I'm going to talk about that in pretty specific ways. I hope it's helpful to people. So before I get to the specific stuff I'm going to talk about, I want to say just a few general things to kind of help you understand why they work. I believe that to get past perfectionism, we need to open up and tap into what is sometimes called the unconscious and sometimes called other things. You know, like Buddhists might call it the silence within. I think of it as some deeper, smarter, larger part of yourself. Also, as my partner pointed out, there's been a fair amount of talk lately about how it's helpful and even necessary to tap into the power of your unconscious in sports like golf or tennis and other areas, and they call that getting into the zone. So that's what I'm really talking about here. So to me, perfectionism is all about the critical voices in your head, voices about what you should do or should be able to do or shouldn't do or something like that. Those voices could be internalized from, you know, old messages we got from teachers or parents or who knows who, maybe just ourselves, maybe they're just coming from the desire to do things well and succeed. But wherever they come from, most of us have those messages to some degree inside ourselves. And they are normal, but they can also really, really get in the way of writing. And I want to add too that sometimes you can have experiences with critiques and stuff like that where it kind of builds on your own negative messages. What I want to, the unconscious, you know, the deeper, smarter part of yourself, that is somewhere inside you, in my imagination at least, beyond or below or beside or whatever the message is, where the critical voices are. And tapping into the unconscious is how you get past perfectionism, right? Because there's a part of you that will not be affected by any of that. It's just in there, but it's not always that easy to tap into it. And I have come up with a few practical ways to do that. So the first one I call fast writing. And we have a handout that Becca is going to hand out. It just describes in detail how I do it. I'm going to talk about it too. Anybody who's taken a class with me or done some coaching with me, which I don't really think there's too many people like that here, know about this fast writing method that I use. So I have learned that you can outrun your perfectionism if you do what I call fast writing. So I know the idea of speed writing and fast writing is not unique to me as a coach and a teacher. Natalie Goldberg, author of Writing Down the Bones, talks about it. I bet some of the teachers this summer are probably using something similar in their classes. But I have my own unique spin on it. So there's a few parts of it. First of all, it involves writing without stopping for a short period of time. So basically what I've learned and what I've helped a bunch of other people put into practice is that it's really useful to put aside a specific short amount of time, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 12 minutes. 12 minutes is not too short. Half hour, probably the longest, and write as fast as you can without stopping. If you feel the overwhelming urge to stop or you're having trouble writing without stopping, you can just write about that. It's also helpful if you're writing a memoir or a story of any kind, which I assume probably most of you here who are at the festival probably are, to start your fast writing in a specific moment. If you're writing memoir, it could be a specific memory that you can get to just by sort of asking yourself where you want to start, or just any specific moment. And when you set down in a moment, you can follow, it's easier to follow where the writing takes you instead of getting tangled up in what you think or what you want to write or something, because you'll have the moment. You can just put down what you find in the moment. And before you know it, that time will be up. And interestingly, when you do that, you might even actually get a scene that you can work with and work into your novel or your short story or your memoir. And, you know, a moment in time, a moment in life, a moment where there are things that happen like exit signs and podiums and people sitting in chairs in front of you is something that's there that you can observe and you can write about, where you don't have to like disappear inside yourself and struggle with your own thoughts. So anyway, so, you know, during the fast writing time, you keep writing without editing or worrying about whether what you're writing is good, or if you do worry about it, you just ignore it. Or, you know, that's what you do during the fast writing. And I have to tell you that doing that is a lot harder than it sounds. And, you know, especially when you've been steeped in perfectionism, practicing perfectionism for, you know, most of your life, as let's face it, us writers probably have, it's really hard to just all of a sudden let go and write like that. So all you can do is do the best you can. You know, we don't want to get into perfectionism about our inability to let go of perfectionism. So I have been fast writing for a long time, and I've generated a ton of material that way. And I still sometimes struggle with letting go and just letting it get on the page. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard. It's harder if I didn't get enough sleep or who knows what. But I just keep going with it. And a lot of times, after a while, it's almost like a breeze will come through and I'll get something. And whatever it is, you know, I almost always get something when I do the fast writing, and the main thing is to just keep writing no matter what. And so that's the first part of it. And then the second part is writing with a partner. It does help to have a very short, specific amount of time where you do it. It also helps to be writing about a moment you can focus on. But there's another thing that's even more crucial for me, and that is doing it with at least one other person. And, you know, sometimes in my classes we all fast write together. Some people can fast write by themselves. I can't. If I try to do it by myself, it takes me maybe 3 minutes to grind into a halt and start editing, or just really getting hung up on it. But somehow when there's another person doing it, then I go, well, she's doing it, I guess I have to do it too. And years ago when I first started doing this, I used to stop and look up at my fast writing partner and try to get her attention so that she would stop too, and she would not stop. You know, she would just be writing and writing, and then I would have to write and write too. And, you know, your goal is to generate material, so that is a great thing. I do a lot of, I don't try to fast write on my own, but I do it a lot with a bunch of different people, and some of them we do it, you know, they live far away from here, and we do it on the phone. You know, we don't write while we're holding the phone to our ears, but we call each other up and say what we're going to write about, and we say how long we're going to write, and then we hang up, and then we do it, and then I call them back or they call me back, and that's it. So I had the most amazing experience where someone that I was going to fast write with said, why don't you start, and I'm going to go to the bathroom and I'll start 10 minutes from now. And for the first 10 minutes, I was just sitting there going, bleh. I could not do it. But as soon as I saw that she was writing, I could do it too. And so anyway, it's fun too. It's a fun way to write. It makes you feel less alone, and it's just a great thing. So that's the first part. And then, so you write it as fast as you can without stopping for a short burst of time with at least one other person. And then the next piece is you share what you wrote with your partner, and they share what they wrote with you. And this is the really important part, probably the most important part. You and your partner praise what each other wrote. You never critique. You don't make suggestions, ask questions, interpret your partner's point, or engage in any sort of editing talk. If you do that, you may actually make it harder for your fast writing partner to fast write the next time. And so instead, you just tell your partner what sticks in your mind from the writing, being lavishly generous with your praise. So there's a reason for this. I have actually had a fair number of people argue with me about this and say, no, I don't want to do that. But I made this up because it works. And what happens is when you say what's good in somebody's writing, or you hear them say what's good in your writing, or what sticks in their minds, or et cetera, it helps you and or your partner get past perfectionism in some way. Because perfectionism just is all about thinking that your writing isn't good enough. And I've had many people, including myself, when they finish the fast writing and they say, oh, that was horrible. And then they read it and then you go, oh, actually there's a lot of really great stuff in that. So I think the tendency is to just sort of sink down into this feeling that what you wrote wasn't any good, especially if you let go and just let it happen on the page. So when you point out what's positive or what sticks in your mind or what's great in somebody's writing, it actually has an effect on them, and it has an effect on their ability to write the next time, to do the fast writing the next time. And also, incidentally, I want to say it works in real life too. If you say good things to people about themselves, they will hear it even if they do not seem to hear it. I have found that it's sometimes hard for people to let go and let go of the idea that they need to critique somebody else's writing because there's problems with it, or also sometimes it's very hard for people to hear or allow other people to praise their writing. And I understand that, but we just ignore that because it has to be done. It really has to be done in order to make it work. And also, there's plenty of time to work with the writing, after this. You don't expect to get anything perfect or finished or whatever from the fast writing. But the whole thing of hearing somebody praise your writing is really powerful. And I have learned it is really powerful for me. I have some theories based on the fact that you really want to hear that stuff once you're used to hearing it. And it does change your sense of confidence. I guess the amazing thing is that I want to say is that you might think that when you're writing away and you're just blabbing it out and you're not really controlling it or editing or anything, you're not getting anything good, but you are getting something good. And it might be a little rough, it might need to be worked with, but once you let go and you let something come through from that unconscious place, or you start engaging with the moments that are in your mind, you'll get amazing stuff that way that you wouldn't get any other way. You'll get amazing stuff because life is more interesting than anything you can come up with in your head. And you'll get metaphors and connections and all kinds of stuff that you wouldn't get otherwise, and the writing is very alive. So I love doing this, and it has totally changed my life. Let's see. But the writing you get from the fast writing will not be what I call finished. It just won't be. You have to let go of that expectation too. And whatever you get, you'll have to work with it. Maybe not every single time, but pretty much every single time. So the fast writing process is a 2-part process, and the second part involves finishing the writing, i.e. editing it. Over the years, I have come to believe, and I have come to truly believe and truly feel there is no such thing as good writing or bad writing. There's only writing that's finished and writing that's not finished, and most writing is not finished. Perfectionism tells us it needs to be finished right off the bat, or it's not good. Sometimes perfectionism even tells us that we're not a good writer or a good enough writer if we don't write something publishable or just as good as what we read in books, and we should be able to do that right out of the starting gate. But the truth is, it takes a lot of work to get writing that is finished, and it takes a lot of work for everybody. I don't care if they have a Pulitzer Prize. So I like to use the word finished instead of good. If you want, you can substitute the word good for the word finished if that will help you think about what I'm saying. But for me, finished is an important word because it reminds us that it's a process. We can't expect to do it perfectly right off the bat. We need to work with it. And all writers, like I just said, no matter who they are, have to do that work. And any fast writing you do is going to need some work. You're going to need to work on finishing it, and that takes me to the next part of how we get past perfectionism. So, of course, I'm talking about editing. There's even more room for perfectionism with editing because when you're generating new material, at least part of you is tapping into the unconscious. That creative force inside you that I like to think of as a larger, smarter part of ourselves. But when you're editing, you're working with what you already wrote, and it's easy to have it all be in your thinking, analyzing, self-criticizing part of your mind. And you can absolutely wreck your writing with that kind of perfectionism when you're editing. So editing successfully involves getting past that part of your mind that's saying, this is stupid, this is too long, I don't like this word, what about that word? And getting past that and engaging with the unconscious. So I'm going to talk about that. How do we do that? But first I want to talk about the word combing. So anybody who has worked with me knows that I prefer the word combing to editing. I know it's maybe a little stupid, but I call it combing because I think of it as going through the writing with a big old fine-tooth comb, the language, and language that you've already got on the page because you fast wrote it or you wrote it some other way. And, when you go through it with a comb, it turns up all sorts of things like snarls and in the language and tangles in the thinking and gaps and all sorts of stuff. And it takes some patience to comb through writing, but it's kind of fun for some people. It is for me. So anyway, the main thing to know is any fast writing you do, you're going to need to comb through it. And this is another place where perfectionism can really get in the way and make a mess. Like in my description of the talk, I believed I said it can turn it into a confusing hack fest. And I say that from experience as a writer myself and also as a writing coach. And it can make you ruin what you wrote, make you dismantle it, sort of get in the way of your ability to make any kind of decisions about what works and what doesn't work, and just take some piece of writing that's really about 80% finished and make it 10% finished. I have learned over the years through observing what is really going on with me as I edit or comb, that in order to make good decisions when I'm doing that, I have to drop down into some place inside my mind, into that unconscious place for little tiny bits of time and connect with that energy inside me that's sort of smarter than I am. And when I do that, I get past perfectionism, and there's something in me that knows exactly what the right thing is. But I have to keep on touching base with that thing inside myself. I used to call it something, but now I can't remember what. So I think some people do this naturally. They edit. They're good editors. It comes easily to them, and that's how they're doing it, even though they don't really know it. I was always a pretty good editor. But for a lot of people, it's something they have to learn how to do through practice and trial and error and stuff like that. And it's a little bit hard to teach people how to do it, I have found. But I try to in my coaching, and I'm going to try to do that during our weekend class. So how I do that editing process is kind of complicated, and I'm just going to try to summarize it now. Again, like I already said, perfectionism is something that goes on in the thinking, analyzing, self-criticizing brain. It's got all those negative messages in there. And somehow down below that is another part of the inner self that is a deeper, smarter place, like the unconscious, or maybe what what Buddhists would call inner silence. And I don't know if anybody here is a Buddhist or follows Buddhist thought. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody was. These ideas are something you can find in there, but it also appears in a lot of other spiritual writing. The Power of Now, that book by Eckhart Tolle, talks about it. And also another word for what I'm talking about is probably intuition. We all know what intuition is. The still small voice is that line in the Bible. Maybe it's still whatever. Anyway, what I've learned about writing and editing and getting past perfectionism is that in order to do it really well, we have to tap into that clearer, smarter part of ourselves and learn how to listen to it. And I've given at least one other talk about this here in the Summer Writing Festival called "Edit Like a Zen Master." "Edit Like a Zen Master" is the name of my weekend classes. I guess you could see before we turned that light off. You can find that other talk, at least theoretically. I tried to find it the other day and I couldn't. But anyway. Editing like a Zen master is about dropping down to get to a place of silence or peace or intuition or whatever you want to call it inside yourself just for a little bit of time. I used to call it the hopper. I have to put this word inside the hopper just for a moment. And when I put it in there, I know if it's right. And you'll know when you get to it because you'll feel different. You will all of a sudden kind of know, yeah, this works, this doesn't work. If something doesn't work, then you keep doing it, until you find something that does work. And how I find the places that don't work is, I go through writing, my writing, sometimes other people's writing, actually often other people's writings, and when I come to a place where I feel confused or bored or my attention wanders, I don't just go, oh, my attention is wandering because I don't have enough attention. I go, oh, there's probably a problem with this, and I don't even know what it is, but I identify that's the spot where there's a problem. And then I try different things, and I sort of put them in the hopper for a really short time, and then I know if they work. So it's complicated. And it's a process that maybe you don't even need to learn how to do it. Maybe you already do it unconsciously. But I highly recommend it. I do work with some people as a coach who really have a hard time editing. They can generate new material that's really beautiful, but when it comes time to work with the writing, they kind of ruin it. And so, anyway, you can always take my class. Hopefully we'll learn something about how to do that in the class. That's very hard to teach. I tried to do it one other time. So, okay, anyway, those are my concrete suggestions for getting past perfectionism. And in a minute, I'll ask if anybody has any questions. I just want to end by saying that we are all good writers. And I believe that it is a cultural myth that some writers are better or more talented than others. It's a cultural myth we've all been fed for, our lives, and it was really a hot cultural myth in the 60s and 50s and all of that. But I really believe that we are all good writers, that we all have our own material. And it's just that some writers have mastered finishing writing, and they are willing to do what it takes to finish their writing. And it takes a long time to acquire the skills and the ability to do that. In my own personal experience, some of the skills it takes to write well are spiritual skills, like what I talked about, whether the writer knows that or not. And it takes a while to get good at those spiritual skills, just like it can take a while to get good at yoga or just about anything else. And writing well is really all about putting in the time, cultivating the spiritual skills and the other skills, and learning how to tap into your own creative energy to find that quiet place inside you, to get to your own truth through language. And I just want to say, of course, it's a lot of work, but if you do dedicate yourself to that, it will pay off enormously in your writing and in your life. I mean, I can practically get choked up saying that. And it is worth it. And I think coming to the festival, taking these classes is a great way to get engaged or stay engaged in that endeavor. I believe through my coaching that the number one stumbling block for people to really write and become writers and let writing be part of their lives is fear, fear of writing badly. And then the negative messages we have inside our heads, contributing or creating that fear. And I guess I don't really believe we can make ourselves not be afraid. Or if we try, we might make ourselves more afraid. But I believe we can find our way around the fear and help each other find our way around it. And that doing that and sticking with writing, letting writing be part of your life in whatever way it ends up being is worthwhile beyond your wildest dreams. It has been for me. So thank you for coming, and I think we have some time left, so anybody have any questions or anything? Want to say anything?
I can hold it like this. So you said I think you said something like people get sort of perfectionistic in their editing, and they take something that's 80% finished and they mess it up, and then it's all of a sudden 10%.
Sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes 10% finished. How do you know? I mean, this is the
right.
place.
How do you
know that it's 80% finished? I have no clue.
Well, it's the same way that you know anything in any of this. You know through your intuition. And if you don't know, then you might need to drop down to a place inside yourself where your intuition can kick in, and partly you can tell by how you feel when you read it, when you read your own work, or even if you read it aloud to somebody, sometimes you can tell how you feel. Like I know for me, if you feel embarrassed, probably needs more work, or if you feel, bored by your own writing, it probably needs more work. And I also think it takes a while sometimes. Like this happens to me a lot. I think something's finished, and then I look at it, a couple days later, and it's like, oh no, that's not finished. But when it's really finished, you'll know because you'll feel it in your gut, And other people can tell you or not, but I personally feel that's a little risky because people are not as reliable as your own intuition. And does that answer that question? I think that's a great question.
You kind of just touched on it, but I'm a student, and so I'm constantly submitting my writing to professors and mentors. And we were just discussing, I struggle with listening to that intuition and knowing what I feel is right for my writing.
I know. It's
then,
hard.
Yeah, and then getting feedback from people who are better writers than me, people who are more educated than me, people who have been doing this for longer than me. And, when we find those points of disagreement, how to reconcile that. And I don't know, I'd be curious to know what your recommendations are, because it's hard. It's hard when
it is hard. Especially if it's somebody who's kind of in a position of authority with you, and if you feel like they know more about writing than you do. I know that's a rough one, because the thing that I have found is that not all criticizing and suggesting is really that good, for you or what you need or that helpful. And if you're a student and it's like a dissertation or something, and those people are going to be passing or not failing your dissertation, you might just want to do what they say, and then do it your own way, if you're going to publish it or something in a book. And also I have found, I'm not going to name any names, but I publish stuff regularly that editors, of journals make mistakes in their editing. And I just let them do it because I've had really bad luck trying to argue with them about it. And it's more important to me to get it published. So, you sort of have to weigh all the options, but I know, it really can, that is a hard thing. And I think the main thing to know, though, is it's good to stay grounded in your own sense of what's good and what isn't. And the only way to do that is to listen to your intuition, maybe your friends, trusted friends too. But I've known people to completely rewrite novels, for example, based on other people's suggestions and ruin them. So, but it's a good problem. It's a writer's problem, a writing problem, and there's lots of solutions to it.
Thank you for describing the difference between combing and editing. I was wondering if those serve different purposes, if they are different phases of the same process, if they are different processes, or if combing is something you do like first and then edit, or if they're kind of separate entities.
To me, I'm not sure there is a difference. Combing is just a word that I made up that I use for editing. So any editing you do is going to involve really close attention to language, and not like combing. It's like, I think it's sort of a myth that you can edit without working with the language. And so I guess I don't think of a difference. I really don't. It's just my own word that I like. But it helps me picture what has to be done. And, all writing is made of language. It's very hard to make writing better without working with the language.
Yeah, thank you.
You spoke about two perfectionisms, like it's me. I'm just next to her. Yeah. Yeah, and so the perfectionism that keeps you from even starting writing, or the perfectionism is one more common or harder to get over? Do you see, have different, is it?
I'm not exactly sure if I know what you're saying. I think I was saying that perfectionism in some cases is our friend because it makes us try to get the writing as close to perfect as we can. But what I'm talking about is when it's a problem and you get all tangled up in this feeling that it needs to be good right off the bat. And I think what I was talking about different, when you're generating writing, there's one way that I work with that.
Okay.
And then when you're editing, there's another way that I work with that. Does that answer that question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Thanks for the question.
And I liked your comment about just lavish in praise right? Oh, that would make you want to write more, right?
I know. It's really powerful.
Yeah.
And when I teach my classes, we do that, and people's writing really grows over the week in the class. I think of it as sprinkling water on a plant, and it grows. And I think it grows because when you hear yourself being praised, it makes you want to be praised again. And when you hear other people being praised, it makes you want to do what they did.
And does it help people because they know they're writing and they're going to have such a wonderful response to it, right? It makes it easier to start writing. Maybe.
Yeah, it makes it easier, and also, I don't know, for some reason, in some magical way, it works. It makes people write well. And counter to what most people think, that you have to tell people what they're doing wrong to make them write better. Personally, I don't think that works. Anyway, can I help you?
I guess this is kind of, so I know that some writers, like I have at least experienced a problem of a fear of visibility, being seen for the writing that I think is bad. But good or bad aside, unfinished or that, have you ever dealt with maybe the fear of just being seen?
Yeah.
And how to work with that? Because
I know. I think that's part of being a writer, especially part of being a memoir writer. My memoir, The Rooms of Heaven, which will now appear soon, I told everything in that book. And afterwards, I felt really embarrassed by that. And I think that falls under the category of something you just have to talk to your therapist about, maybe, or tolerate it, or work with it or something, because you can't let it get in the way of writing. The thing that I believe is that, if you want to write, there is something in you that is going to make you write, or if you don't, you will regret it at the end of your life, And so there are hard parts, and that's one of them. For some people may be more difficult than others, but you just have to work with it or ignore it. There's a lot of bad feelings that can be ignored sometimes. And I have learned, I had this experience where when I was writing The Rooms of Heaven, there was something that I was really embarrassed by, and I felt I had never told anybody. Turned out I had told people, but I thought I had never told everybody. And it had to be written to make the book work, and I already had a book advance, which would never happen in today's world. And I was crying. I just did not know what to do. It's like, I cannot put that in this book. And then I thought, well, why don't I just write it down, and then I can decide. So I wrote it down. And then after I wrote it down, it was like, well, that's not so bad. That all makes sense. And then it changed, And so I always think if you're getting hung up on worries about what people will think about what you write, or maybe hurting somebody's feelings or being seen, all those things, I'd say just do the writing and then you can decide. You can always take something out or you can always change it. And, you can always change the details, but it's really hard to write and not write at the same time. Like if something is, no, I'm not going to write. Yes, I am. No, I'm not. Then that does not work.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good question. So I think we're just about out of time. So do we want to flash my books up here? I am going to get away because I hate that light.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. It's just been wonderful.